is on Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. So we'll get right into it.
Okay, so we left off in the last year of Mozart's life, 1791. So at the time of Mozart's death, his music had been very successful, very popular, and he didn't leave his family very much money. That's for a couple of reasons. I suspect he probably spent too much because he tended to do that throughout his whole life. On top of paying his own medical bills, and then as well as Costanza, his wife, was sick right before he was sick as well. So I think a lot of it went to medical bills. But there's a lot of sources that kind of suggest that Mozart maybe wasn't very popular when he died, but I don't think that would be the case because Mozart had just premiered The Magic Flute at the end of September. So a little more than a month later, he died from the start of the Magic Flute premiere. And there was hundreds of performances of The Magic Flute when he after he first premiered it, and it was really, really popular in Vienna. And then he'd also just gotten finished with Don Giovanni premiering, which was still very, very popular in Prague, especially. So I think that there's a notion that he was unpopular because he didn't have a lot of money when he died, but he definitely was popular. He just spent a lot of money, I think was the case. And his family did, after the fact, make a lot of money publishing his music that hadn't been published yet. I think only maybe like a third of his music was published when he was alive, and then all the rest of it was published slowly over time after he had died. So Mozart was buried in Vienna, and he was buried in an unmarked, they call it a common grave, which was part of the Viennese tradition at the time. If you were not noble or royalty in any way, you were usually buried in an unmarked grave. And it also probably ties in with the fact that Mozart was a Freemason too, which was very much, they were not about a whole big ritual when somebody died. So he had a very plain kind of funeral and was in this unmarked grave. So that's it.
So Mozart's cause of death officially, we really don't know anything officially. And as we go into his death and his relationship with Salieri, we really... So the attending physician claimed that Mozart died of a natural they called it a severe military fever, and the military just being kind of the spots that were on his skin. And modern medicine, based on accounts of Mozart's symptoms and many illnesses which preceded it, suggests that he probably died from kidney failure. Notice as well, just because when the body does get that sick, a lot of the times all of the organs will go into total organ failure. So it could have been any number of things. And we really see a speculation, although we know that he was possibly malnourished, and he frequently had fevers. And as a child, he was a very sickly child, and it probably came with the traveling of his time and with kind of the activities that he was doing. We see that a lot of it just came probably from malnourishment. But now, the most that we get speculation from is Mozart and Salieri. So there are several theories regarding Mozart's cause of death. Some suggest that Mozart did not die of natural causes. The most famous that most people know is that Salieri attempted to poison him, which is seen in many famous films and plays about Mozart and Salieri that we'll get into later. But we really start to see that several years after his death, this rumor begins to start to go around about Salieri, and one rumor even suggests that in 1823, Salieri himself admitted to poisoning Mozart. However, Salieri at the end of his life was suffering from dementia, and so we really can't ever really take into account much of what he said at the end of his life, whether it was regret. But we do see a lot about Salieri and about the friendship, the camaraderie that they had, but also, of course, we see the competing between Mozart and Salieri. So we're really not all that quite sure of whether or not Salieri may have done something. We don't know enough.
So Christopher mentioned that there's a there's a lot of media that depicts this storyline. So that whole thing started with about 40 years after Mozart's death, with Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. He wrote a short play, or sometimes it's called a play, sometimes it's called a poem, but it's entitled Mozart and Salieri. And in it, it's just a short scene where Salieri poisons Mozart's wine, I think, and it's suggested that it's out of jealousy of Mozart's success as a composer. I'll have to say, Salieri himself, during his time, was definitely a successful composer as well. I think Mozart's compositions definitely survived much longer, and that they're much more popular now than Salieri was. But back during their time, though, Salieri was a very popular composer and very successful. He did hold that court composer position in Vienna that Mozart had been trying to get for so long. So they were definitely pretty similar, I think, at the time. So then from the short play / poem, it inspired a much longer play that was written much, much later. So this one was in 1979 by English writer, and he wrote this play entitled Amadeus, which then inspired the insanely popular film, also called Amadeus, which that premiered just a couple of years after the play was written. Let's take a look at our first video. This is like a little trailer.
Some said he accused the man. Salieri. I don't believe it. Could it be possible? Did Salieri do it after all? Did he murder Amadeus?
So the film explores the fictional storyline, or probably fictional storyline. We're not totally sure. Some of it is definitely fictional, but explores that storyline of that Salieri was severely jealous of Mozart, and so he maliciously poisoned him over time and was the one who killed him. And we also have another little clip here that depicts that moment of Salieri admitting to killing Mozart when he was much older and long after Mozart died. So let's check that out.
That was Mozart. Wolfgang. Amadeus Mozart. The man you accuse yourself of killing. You've heard that? Is it true?
Is it true? That's a great question. All right. So next we have Mozart's Requiem. So part of the Requiem was composed in late 1791, so just before Mozart died. It was left unfinished when Mozart died in the beginning of December of that year. So let's look at our other Amadeus clip real quick that depicts him writing it as he's near death.
Now the tenors. Fourth beat of the first measure on C. Second measure, fourth beat, D. All right. Yes, continue. Second beat of the fourth measure on F. Now the orchestra. Second bassoon and bass trombones with the basses. Identical notes and rhythm. First bassoon, tenor trombones with the tenors. Go too fast. Do you have it? Go too fast. Do you have it?
So that was them depicting him writing it. I don't think Salieri was the one writing the notating the Requiem for him. I can't think if it was. It was one of his students, I know, who had written it. So that part was not historic yet. historically accurate. That was not Salieri doing that, but it makes for good drama in the film for him to be there. So that's why that's like that. Okay, so it's also unclear exactly how much of the Requiem was written by Mozart. That's mainly because of the fact that Süssmayr, who finished the first version of it, he said that he took a lot of the ideas for finishing the Requiem from Mozart's little sketches of bits of the Requiem, and it came from, he called it scraps of paper, but all those scraps of paper are mysteriously disappeared at this point, so nobody knows what those scraps of paper said, or which instruments had been written. The only ones that we know for sure were written entirely by Mozart is the Requiem Aeternam and the Kyrie. We know every single instrument, all the vocal parts, everything was written by Mozart from beginning to end. And then we also know that the first 8 bars of the Lacrimosa was written by Mozart. But besides that, there's a whole bunch of parts that have various amounts written. And basically, we only don't know because all of those little sketches and scraps of paper have disappeared, which is unfortunate. So let's hear the Lacrimosa, where we know the first 8 bars was written by Mozart.
So that was the Lacrimosa, and other parts of the Requiem had kind of what we're calling a skeleton form, which had been completed. So much of the vocal parts and continua were finished, as well as some prominent orchestral parts. So we do see, like Sarah had said, that we do see that there is kind of a mix, and it's unclear of what was completely finished by Mozart and what was finished by his predecessors or his students. So the first completed version was finished by composer Franz Süssmayr in 1792. And now I just want to give us a listen to the introitus. So that was the introitus, and Constanze Mozart claimed that Mozart had once stated he felt as though he was writing the Requiem for his own funeral due to his poor health at the time he started this. So we see that at the end of his life, I mean, he's writing a Requiem, and we know that a Requiem is, at least in the Catholic tradition, is completely sung through for the funeral of someone who's passed. And so it was seemed kind of fitting that this quote kind of fits in with us. And here is one of the more famous parts. The Confutatis actually comes right before the Lacrimosa, and it's attacca right into it. So this is the Confutatis, which we saw from the clip from Amadeus that he was writing.
And one more interesting thing too about the Requiem was that the Requiem was performed for Constanza's death. And both of Mozart's sons' deaths, actually, all of those were performed. And I think, Christopher, tell me if I'm wrong, wasn't it also performed for JFK's funeral? That's one that I have in my head, that I think this was the Requiem that was performed for JFK's funeral as well, actually.
I know that the Samuel Barber Adagio for strings was played for JFK.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if the Mozart, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
I think it was. I know there's definitely quite a few famous people that have had this Requiem played as the Requiem for their funeral. It's definitely a popular choice.
So that is our series on Mozart, and we are so lucky that we were able to stretch it over a period of 3 weeks, because if not, we would not have gotten nearly enough information. Obviously, you can tell that a lot of the end of, well, actually, I'll go to say that a lot of the beginning and end of Mozart's life is really shaded in a lot of, other characters being influenced in his life, like Leopold, his father, and like Salieri at the end. And so a lot of it kind of comes down to, well, we hope you cited your sources when we were looking through the information that was found on Mozart. And it's just very, very interesting to be able to kind of dive into these composers' lives, specifically Mozart, who was known for being kind of a jack of all trades, but also not a traditional man, not a traditional Italian composer like Salieri. And he kind of came in and he shook the establishment up. And so we really hope that you enjoyed our lecture on Mozart. Do you have any questions or comments or concerns?
Yeah.
I had to unmute myself. Just a couple of quick comments. This has been very helpful to me because I didn't know most of this. So I've been watching the recordings, and my one question is, did you guys both take German when you were in college?
I didn't take German language. No, I took French when I was in college, but we do take diction classes. So we do work on exclusively German pronunciation, which sometimes can make it seem like we maybe did take the language, but we're just very good at convincing people that we know how to say all the German, whether or not we know how to speak it.
Yeah, I actually took French in college as well. I'm bilingual. I speak Spanish. My family is Hispanic. I do study under a maestro who speaks fluent German as well as Hebrew, and so I do know some German, but I'm not anywhere, nor will I ever say I'm able to speak.
Oh, okay. I feel better. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you were to learn German to be able to sing these songs. You learn the diction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I spend a lot of time on pronunciation. You can be pretty convincing if you know all the rules.
Yeah, because I look at the names of the darned operas and right away I'm completely overwhelmed even before I get to the music. What is this?
Especially like the objection from the Soralia Austin, the Serralde, it's just this, it's all these.
Magic Flute makes a little more sense to me than the actual name of it. Another thing, I just wanted to let you know that my husband James sat in with us today because he's taking cello, and he was thinking he might enjoy sitting in. So you had an extra person here today.
Oh, wonderful.
Well, we're so lucky that you joined us. We hope you enjoyed it. We should be next week, same time. We're still kind of going back and forth with what we'll be doing our next lecture on, but we really hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.